Coming up on Theater Talk.
I have something here I wanted to read, which somebody sent me in the mail today. I have to read this to you. Okay, ready? This is from Variety, April 3rd, 1957. Rodgers and Hammerstein plan to have a Broadway stage version of Cinderella ready for Broadway, probably in the spring of 1958. There we go.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm the producer, Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
Michael.
Ugh, I'm already scared. What is that look?
It's Cinderella.
Oh, yeah, and
Cinderella
you're one of the evil stepsisters, clearly.
That's the part I aspired to play.
Absolutely.
But we have someone who plays it better.
There is a terrific new Broadway musical. I call it new because it's not just a revival of Cinderella, the Rodgers and Hammerstein television classic. It has been completely rethought and rewritten by our good friend Douglas Carter Beane. Features a terrific cast and a wonderful, important Broadway producer, and they're all with us today on Theater Talk. I want to welcome Ann Harada, who's playing really one of the evil stepsisters.
I'm not evil, I'm delusional.
So is Susan. And Douglas Carter Beane, who has rethought this classic and updated it for 2013.
Yeah, why not? 1691, it felt good. It felt good to redo it.
Time. And one of my favorite producers of all time, Robyn Goodman, who scored a big success with Avenue Q a few seasons back, and she's here with this is kind of an expensive show for you, isn't it, Robyn? I mean, you're always identified with the smaller...
It's the biggest show I've ever done.
What's the cost of this?
$13 million.
Can you say that without passing out?
I just passed out.
And Victoria Clark, the fabulous Victoria Clark, whom I love so much in Sister Act and Light in the Piazza, is playing the Fairy Godmother, right?
Yes, I am.
But do you have no Bippity Boppity Boo song? Because that's
no,
the song
thank goodness.
in the Disney movie.
No. This is all Rodgers and Hammerstein.
It's impossible.
Yes, I get to sing that wonderful song with Laura Osnes, and I have a wonderful song in the second act, too.
Yeah. Now, Robyn, what got you thinking about doing a $13 million? And I'm going to keep repeating that number.
Sorry I ever told you.
The $13 million production of Cinderella. I mean, is this a play for that family audience that everyone is chasing now on Broadway?
No, that's not how it came to be. It was because Ted Chapin and I became friends.
And Ted's the head of the
Rodgers and Hammerstein organization. He's the president. And we were on a trip together to Israel, the famous Manny Eisenberg trip. Yeah. And I said, when are we going to work together? Hoping he would say, would you like to do My Fair Lady or something? And
that other great Rodgers and Hammerstein show.
Yes, they have written so many great shows. And he said, well, what about Cinderella? Can you do something with that score? And I said, sure, if Cinderella can have a purpose and rescue the prince as much as he rescues her, I'd love to do it. And he said, okay, which shocked me, which meant we could develop it and get a new book writer. I thought that it would be a wonderful way to tell a story that would be good for girls, which all the musicals I've ever done have been for boys or about boys. And I'm in my girl period now, trying to write things that are positive models for girls. Now, that's why I picked.
I was going to say that. Are you in your girl period now too?
I'm feeling.
I'm accepted the assignment.
I'm in touch with my feminine side, and I'm man enough to say that.
That's right.
After Sister Act too.
After Sister Act, well, I am the father of a daughter, and so I think that changes your view of entertainment a great deal, more than I thought it would.
Really.
And suddenly, when I would see my daughter looking at older versions of Cinderella, I would go, no, don't read that. That is wrong. That's not. You don't meet someone once, and then wonder why they're not pursuing you. So I became fascinated with that and the idea when we were having a meeting about just a general meeting, and she brought it up, and I did what I do about just about everything is I passed.
You did.
I only did once on this. I think I passed on Xanadu 8 times, but I only passed on this once. And then I went away and I started reading through old versions of Cinderella.
The old legend.
The legend, the
fairy
actual
tales.
Fairy tales, which are
quite dark.
Well, the Grimm is very dark. That involves chopping off heels and,
Yeah. Oh,
and
I like
birds
that.
poking out eyes. Of course you love that.
That's the version I want to see.
Of course.
Riedel is a German name, isn't it? So, you know? So, but in the Perrault version, the French version of 1691, which is the first version that was actually written down, and he's the man who invented the fairy tale, I read this story, and it was fantastic. It was not the story that had been told. Cinderella had actually met the prince over a series of times. There were a couple events that they met together and they talked. She had sisters who were not evil or ugly. They were vain and misguided and funny. Cinderella was this great big give character to the kingdom. She turned them off of sarcasm and ridicule and turned them on to kindness. Kindness, Michael. Kindness.
Kindness.
I don't know if this show's going to be for me. I must say.
I
All I know
look
is
in the world.
$13 million.
Oh, God.
right.
I'm going to kill myself.
So I was fascinated with that. Then I read a lot on the Perrault, and I found out that he was a member of the court. He was a social satirist, writing under his son's name, and actually poking fun at what was happening in the kingdom. Then I looked at Oscar Hammerstein and his social conscience, and I thought, those are two things with the word social in it, and I'm a very social person. So this sounds like a great project. And then I started getting ideas in my head of all these older versions and trying to make it a story that I could tell my daughter, and she would go, oh, those are lessons for life. I would have a good life if I followed these lessons. And and I was doing this while Sister Act was happening, and I would walk by Vicki, and I said, I just hear you singing these Fairy Godmother songs. She goes, well, I'm looking to play a bag lady sometime soon. and happily.
Did I really say that?
I did, because, oh, that's a fantasy of mine. I was like, okay.
I don't know what I was hopped up on at that time.
But when you were in a nun, like next I want to
Not
play a
remember
bag lady.
saying
The Prokofiev ballet version,
Yes,
Russian
yeah.
ballet version, she is a beggar woman who transforms into a fairy godmother because Cinderella's kind to her. And I said, well, that's Russian. That's not covered under American copyright. I can have that. So I snatched it up and put it in the show. And
So
now
you also, I'm going to the opening night, so I haven't seen it. But you are a bag, you're a bag woman.
That's it. I'm tossed aside and dismissed and undercover,
Oh, wow.
getting to know Cinderella so that I can ascertain if she's really worthy of the largesse of the gift that needs to be given to someone. And she's, yes.
What-
It's a good Samaritan plot in there.
it is.
It
Yes.
totally is, and I did my own fairy research. I went back and
You're in theater, darling.
it's very easy to
not
do
hard to
fairy
do.
research. Let me tell you,
Show up in half hour.
walk up and down through Times Square.
The original version I wrote was a lot of the fairy tales reading, she was the fairy godmother was kind of sarcastic and mean. And working with this one over here, she's become such an amazing maternal figure. And just in that wonderful way of Vicky goes, well, I guess I could say that, but wouldn't I really say something like, and it would be transformed in this really great character.
You leave the sarcastic and mean to Anne.
I was just going to
That's
say,
right.
Anne, please,
That's
do
where
you
it
inject
parks.
a little cruelty?
Yes,
Is there little
if
Brothers
there
Grimm
is
in
a,
your performance?
Absolutely.
There is a comic villain. Well, there's three of us who sort of have to handle the comic antagonist parts. Peter Bartlett, Harriet Harris, and myself. And I'm happy to say I think we're up to the task.
I do.
Yes, you are.
Absolutely.
Is this like a twirling evil mustache?
Not at
type?
all.
No.
No.
It's smarter than that.
Well, I said to you, you were evil, and you said, I'm not evil. Again, I'm misguided.
delusional.
Yeah, I am. I'm
yeah.
misguided and delusional. I'm that girl who just tries way too hard to be popular, who is so convinced that she is, the prettiest girl in the room and the biggest deal, and why isn't everybody looking at me all the time? And so her clothes are just a little bit more over the top than everybody else's, and everything about her is just like, look at me, I'm fantastic, not realizing that she's also incredibly obnoxious and annoying. But she's doesn't have a bad heart. She's not really mean to
Well, you're
Cinderella.
Sounds like a part I could play.
Oh,
when
you're
you-
not?
when you-
That's just your mother?
Come for a fitting anytime.
Thank you for. Now,
I don't really initiate meetings.
Yeah, you go along with your
I
mother.
do. I
yeah.
go along with her.
We're having a side conversation.
I want to ask you guys, because I know most of the Rodgers and Hammerstein stuff, but I really don't know Cinderella. I've not seen the classic television production with Julie Andrews. How good is this score? How does it compare to the great
I
scores?
think there are. It's not a full score to start off with.
Right.
It was written for television, so it's only about an hour and 15
The original is
minutes.
what, 12 songs?
Yeah,
75 minutes or
it's
so?
like, it's not a lot of music. There's only like 7 or 8 songs, but they are as good. The basic ones, there's Impossible, Do I Love You, 10 Minutes Ago,
In My Own
In
Little
Little
Corner. In My Own
Corner.
Little Corner.
These are like when we did our
Night.
very
Lovely Night is
Lovely
gorgeous.
Night, which is
I mean, this was written during the real high point of
yeah.
Rodgers and
They
Hammerstein.
did this,
50th.
and then they did Sound of Music.
Yeah.
That big.
So they
piece
were
of-
really cooking. Great.
They were on a roll,
Yeah,
and
they were
That
on-
little
They were
known-
peaking.
and they actually, I have something here I wanted to read, which somebody sent me in the mail today. I have to read this to you. Okay, ready? This is from Variety, April 3rd, 1957. Rodgers and Hammerstein plan to have a Broadway stage version of Cinderella ready for Broadway, probably in the spring of 1958. There we go.
It's only taken.
I think it took them a little while. I wasn't born yet. That's part of it.
Well, I was, and I read that.
Julie Andrews probably wasn't available.
I couldn't read, but
No,
I
but
read it.
they did this for television.
Did they write it for Julie Andrews?
They wrote it for Julie
Yes.
Andrews, for Kay Ballard, many of the great stars of the television. But it was a massive success. I
Yeah,
think
well, yeah,
for
yeah.
every television set in America, 4 people were watching it.
Yes.
It
So
broke
it
all
was.
records.
Yeah.
So it broke all the records, and
A little more popular than Smash, on which Robyn and Ann and I have appeared.
for every television set in America, 4 people are not watching Smash. But then they did it again in the 60s, which is the version I saw,
Right.
with Leslie Ann Warren.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And Stuart Damon. I never miss a Stuart
Oh, that's
Damon
right,
musical.
Stuart Damon.
And then,
He was very handsome.
Yes,
and
he
then,
was.
and then in the 90s was the Brandy Whitney Houston, Craig
Bernadette.
Zaden and Neil Marin version, Bernadette Peters. So it's happened on television a lot. There have been tours of it. It's very big in Asia, all across Asia. It's very big in
With Oscar's
American
book you're
tours.
talking about.
This is with different, everyone kind of showed it as their own version of the
Yeah.
book. Because Oscar only wrote a teleplay version.
Right, right.
And so it's been around, but they never really kind of could get it to Broadway until now.
Have you had to fill out the score with the other?
We
Rodgers-
found about 5.
4 now, I think.
She has a splendid song that was written for Mary Martin for a movie,
Oh, what's it called?
There is music in you.
Oh,
Beautiful.
Which was
Beautiful
in the
song.
Brandy version, actually.
which is Whitney sings in the Brandy version, but she doesn't do the soul riffs, shockingly.
That's not my forte.
He's doing all Whitney's
And then
parts now.
Anne has a song that is a duet that has become a solo with chorus.
what song is that, Ann?
Stepsister's Lament.
Oh, I'm curious to know how has Disney responded to this? Because Disney is famously, they have a famous Cinderella themselves. Have they been?
I'm still waiting by the phone.
Because they announced recently. What did Disney announce, Susan? That they're doing.
Well, they haven't called me and told me.
No, but aren't they? They're doing. Aren't they
It was
doing
in the paper
Cinderella or
today.
It was in the paper today that they were
Yes.
doing. They were going to do a stage version.
No,
No,
film.
a film version, a live film version of their Cinderella.
Because if this thing works, I mean, you could really have the claim on the Cinderella brand name.
I think there's probably
Disney
room for
felt that
both.
they
I think that, movies also feed stage, and I think they're very different properties, and I think there's a huge audience for both.
At the time that they did the Cinderella with Julie Andrews, the Disney movie was there, and even because I was a young child, I have to say, very distinct. And you saw them both, and they were completely
I think
distinct
so.
entities. Yes.
It's quite interesting, though, working with Rodgers and Hammerstein, because one hears that some of the estates are very protective of the material. You know, they don't want anything changed. But Rodgers and Hammerstein, particularly under leadership of Ted Chapin, they seem to be willing to allow these properties to be explored and reinvigorated for.
I felt it was a great gift that Ted gave me, and I took it very seriously, actually. And when I saw Laura Osnes in a reading about 3.5 years ago, I took her aside and said, I haven't got a script yet, but I promise you I have a role you're going to play in about 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
Because I couldn't imagine anyone else. If I was going to do Cinderella, I had to have Laura Osnes.
Speaking of hovering, you are soaring through the air.
Yes.
As the fairy godmother.
Yes.
And I did wonder if you weren't terrified. You certainly didn't look terrified, but you are just whoa around the stage.
I am. Well, I was terrified in the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
hello, Spider-Man.
Our stage, I know. Our stage manager
Yes.
said, you can't just hang there like a sack of cheese. Literally, to quote one of Doug's lines, you've got to do something. Like you got to move your arms. You got to like look happy. So gradually, one flight is on a swing, and I'm not wearing a safety wire at all. And then in the second act, I do.
Are you sitting?
Yes.
I'm seated, but I just have like a little seatbelt on,
well,
as
you
though
have
you were going on an amusement ride, which is basically what it is, because they made it super fast because they wanted it to be
First
more
time I
exciting.
saw her, I almost had a heart attack.
That kid who fell into the pit at Spider-Man wasn't wearing a safety wire either, I gotta tell you.
Please.
And they said the guy from Foy who taught me, this wonderful man, he's like, well, let go. He'd be shouting at me, now let go, now everything looks great, now just let go, don't hang on. I'm like, don't hang on to the parts of the swing wheels. No, just, you're right, you have a seatbelt on, you're fine.
Oh, geez.
So I'd be like, does that look like I'm flying? Really let go. So now I'm experimenting with, actually.
Yeah, I can see.
There's a lot of porta bras, I'm experimenting with my porta bras, but.
She's fantastic.
It's a delightful part of the show.
Do you get to fly around? Any special effects for you?
No, I don't. My only
stepsisters
special
don't
effect
fly.
is my wig.
I was just going to say,
It
your
is
hair.
enormous, and I literally,
Wait till
and
you
my
see it.
dress is so enormous as well that I'm like a Hoover backstage. I will pick up any lint and leaves, anything that's on the ground. I usually go on stage with like people's pens and things because it's just so big.
It collects.
And my hair has actually gotten caught on other cast members' hair and clothes.
Yes.
In the number one time, I think I dragged along Jill Abramovitz with me when I sang
Her
the
bracelet,
song
her
because we were
bracelet.
just stuck. It's just crazy.
Now, I want to ask you, since I have you all here and you all are established Broadway players, and we have a lot of kids who watch the show who dream of making the theater, if I can just get from each of you what it was that made you fall in love with Broadway and how you broke into the business. Can we start with you, Victoria?
Well, I came to New York to be a director. So I was in the NYU musical theater writing program as a director. There was one year where there were 6 directors, and it was me and George Wolfe and Paula Kaloostian and a few other wonderful folks. And I was the person, had just graduated from Yale, and I was the person that everyone gave their material, that the writers would bring their material to present it. So, and I was like, well, I don't want to be an actor. They're like, that's fine, just sight read it. And because I had a history, a background in acting and music, so I would just present the material because the writers didn't want to. So after a while, after a year of doing this, I guess I'd done like hundreds of parts, just picking up everyone's scripts and helping them out. And Ira Weitzman, who's casting director, who would usually cast these shows with more established actors, said, I got news for you. You may be a director, and you probably will be someday, but you're really, right at the moment, you're an actor.
And it had not occurred to you until somebody else told you.
It had occurred to me, but I thought my whole career would be, Dallas Community Theater, which would, I didn't really want to leave New York, so I didn't think I was good enough to have a career in New York.
And the breakthrough part for you was?
Well, they gave me an audition for Sunday in the Park with George, and then once folks saw that on my resume, I couldn't convince them that I was a director anymore. And I just the doors kept opening, and I'm a firm believer that that sometimes other people see something in us that we don't see and acknowledge, and I just kept walking through the doors that were open, and it's been a wonderful ride.
And your experience, Ann, how did you, what?
Well, I always loved the theater, and when I was I grew up in Hawaii, so we didn't have very much access to big shows at all. But my parents, we came on a bicentennial trip to the East Coast. Can you remember that? The bicentennial, that really.
I remember the quarter, 1776, 1976.
And I convinced them to go see a bunch of shows, and after that trip, I was like, that's it.
So that was the first time you saw
Broadway shows, yeah. And then when I came to New York, I had just graduated from Brown, and I came as an intern to a Broadway producer who also had graduated from Brown. She was Suzanne Schwartz.
Yeah, sure, I remember that. Yeah.
And so I got to basically sit in on every aspect of producing a Broadway show, which turned out to be an enormous flop, which was a huge learning
What was it?
experience. Sleight of Hand.
Oh, I remember Sleight of Hand.
Thriller.
That's
by
right.
John Pillmeyer. Yes,
John
that's right.
Pillmeyer, I saw
That's
that.
exactly right. And so I was the girl typing all the script changes, taking them to the actors' apartments at midnight because back then
Script
we
was
did not
changing
have
quite a
the
bit.
internet.
Sleight of hand.
Yeah. And at the time I thought, well, I'd like to be an actor, but I don't think I have the chops for it. I was at Brown. I wasn't any big deal at Brown as an actor. I was there with Laura Linney and Tim Blake Nelson and all kinds of fancy people. And I was like, I suck. But then when I saw people audition, real actors come in and audition for the roles, I thought, well, maybe I'm not as good as him, but I'm certainly as good as that guy. You know what I mean? And I thought, no, it's possible. You don't have to be all things to all people. You can just be you.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of where I decided that I was going to try to go that way.
But then the breakthrough for you was Avenue Q, right? I mean, that's what
Yes,
came
well,
to our
that's
attention.
because I'm a character actress, and when you're in your 20s and 30s, it's a lonely road, especially for, you know, an Asian girl, a short, not thin Asian girl. So you're trying, you know, just to stay in the business until kind of like your time comes.
Right.
And Robyn was really, you know, my guardian angel in that respect.
We'll get to you in 1 second, Robyn, because you're the veteran at this table. I hate to break it to you.
The oldest person, is that what you're saying?
And Douglas, were you?
I'm still trying to break into
You're
the
still
business.
struggling. Were you always
almost
going to be a
there.
playwright, or were you had any acting ambitions? Or?
Here's a secret surprise for you. I always loved theater. I always loved Broadway before I really had seen either. There were movies and old movies and things they'd always be, or putting on a show, the bandwagon or something, or you know, and I just thought, that looks like people seem really all working towards the same thing in a happy manner. That seems like, you know, which my experience so far has been, Michael, despite your best efforts. And I've had a really great time. I mean, and since then, but most people start off in the business as an actor because that's the most visible part of it, like the actor, that's the where's the theater. So I came to New York, well, famously I told my parents I wanted to do theater, and they said, really a nice thing, they said, go to New York for the weekend and see 3 shows and see if it's what you want to do.
Oh, that's sweet.
And I saw A Chorus Line, Chicago, and Pacific Overtures.
Oh my God.
And as I love to say, and as I love to say to my friends, imagine what 3 shows I could have seen that weekend. And I would have been like, I'm a guidance counselor in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. But no, I said these 3 different voices are happening in really fascinating ways, talking about America and who we are as a people. I'm in. So I started as an actor. I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I graduated in class of 1980. With a very famous actress who has asked me not to tell anyone that I graduated with her because I just said 1980. But very famous person graduated who evidently was 7 when she was there with me. But I
I know who it is.
Oh, you know who it is?
You'll tell me later.
So we,
Me too.
a year after we all graduated, no one was working, so I just started writing plays for my pals to be in. And the minute that happened, I was in a play, and it became sort of a success, and it ran for like 2.5 months, which, you know, off Broadway in the early 80s was like, you know,
really, yeah.
Cats Now and Forever. So it was, and as I was sort of in that second month, I said, I have got to get out of this prison cell called acting. I like the rehearsal, I like the writing, but I am losing that part of my mind that keeps it inventive and interesting and fabulous. So that's how I became, and then it was like, I did the ASCAP workshop, and I was an apprentice for different writers, and then from that, I just had my first play in
The Caterpillar.
Advice from a Caterpillar.
Yeah, I could never remember. Now, Robyn, you were an actress, right? I mean,
Yes, I came to New York as an actress.
You came to New York as an actress, and a successful actress. You were on a soap, were you not?
I replaced Marcia Mason as Lady Anne at Lincoln Center opposite Michael Moriarty. Played Lady Anne at the Newhouse for a long time until he upstaged me through the back wall. Every night, Michael would make everybody move up further and further.
That kind of actor.
I love that guy.
He's grubbing nuts. He was.
He was a little crazy. Yeah, so I was acting in a very similar experience. I felt like I could see where Meryl Streep, who I knew was going, and where Glenn Close was going, and they were all going someplace that I would never go. So I was a Jewish girl with dark hair, and it just wasn't going to happen, even though I was working all the time. I worked a lot for Joe Papp, and he sort of became my mentor. And I realized I wasn't using enough of my brain, so I started bringing Joe plays and things, and he finally said to me, "You're a producer." I said, "Oh, I don't know how to do that." And then I started, Carol Rothman approached me and said, "You want to start a theater?"
Yeah, well, Second Stage, one of the most important off-Broadway theaters around.
And we
Yes.
Yay.
And we came up with this idea that we loved that no one was doing at the time, and now of course everyone's doing, giving contemporary plays a second chance. And I stayed there for 13 years, and it was very exciting. And then I decided to make a living.
All right, by raising $13 million for...
An interesting side note is that the original stage manager of the original television version, the Julie Andrews version of Cinderella, was Joe Papp.
Yep.
Oh, right.
Gail came the other night and told me that, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Isn't
Interesting.
that amazing?
All right, well, it's a fine, I was going to say revival. It's not really a revival. It's a
Who knows?
musical
That's for
version of-
committees to decide. We're just artists.
That's right.
Oh, God, please. Of Cinderella at the Broadway Theater.
And they sell tiaras at the souvenir stand.
That's right. I'm going to get you one, Susan.
Thank you. I would love
What
that.
about me?
Well,
You're too butch.
And I've got several scenes on Smash to prove it.
That's right.
Victoria Clark, Ann Harada, Douglas Carter Beane, and Robyn Goodman, thanks a lot for being our guests tonight on
Thank
Theater
you.
Talk.
Pleasure, Mike.
About Miss Cinderella at the Broadway Theater.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.